I'd like to introduce Arthur Cooper, who will moderate with Dean Cundey and tell us all about his life and the journey. Thank you very much. As they're coming up, we're going to place 2 microphones, as you see, on either end. We'd like to have you come up and ask questions afterwards. I'll ask Arthur to do his magic and grab a seat. There's some water there. And be kind. And Dean, be truthful.
Hello? Did you ever get tired of that?
Hello.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. So you were wondering off the top, 26 years, that is.
Is that 26 years?
26 years since it was released.
Uh-huh.
So still holds up, I think. How do you feel?
Yeah, it seemed to, you know. And it's a film print, so, you know, there's little scratches and stuff that happens to film.
Yeah.
But 26 years later, it's still up there.
I'd say so. I think everybody was on the edge of their seats, and even though I've seen it once or twice, I'd say in my career, happily all my kids have seen it too. I'm trying to figure out where to start. There's so many places we could come in from. Maybe just for people who don't know your career, maybe it's always nice to just sort of touch very briefly on, well, they know you're baking your child in the oven, but more about just how you got into cinematography, just like the Reader's Digest version, maybe of what you set you on this path to Spielberg.
Well, I'd always wanted to go into film since I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, and from then on, my mother would drop us at the local theater in Alhambra, and the Saturday matinee, there would be a kid-suitable adventure movie or a Disney, Snow White reissue or something. And I saw 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and realized that those guys made me believe the impossible. And I got fascinated by that, so I decided at that point that I wanted to go into film. I went through high school, announced to my mother that in high school I wanted to go to film school, UCLA, and get into the film business. And she suspected this. But I said, I would love to be able to make films like I'd been seeing. And she said, well, you should think about it because it's almost impossible to get into the film business. And it's even more impossible to succeed. Wouldn't you rather be an anesthesiologist?
That sounds like a solid career.
And I was trying to make the connection. She said, well, you're not as heavily demanded upon your time as a doctor, and you make a good living. And I said, thank you for the advice. So I went through a UCLA film school and graduated and was fortunate enough to begin working in film almost immediately. Little low-budget films. My first couple of jobs was makeup. I realized then that you take any job you can get, give it 110%, and it helps you get to your next job. So I followed my own advice, and over a period of time, gradually worked on low-budget movies, action, adventure, cheap movies, for drive-in theaters, principally. We still had drive-in theaters. And over a period of time, I just connected with various films. And then one day, I was introduced by a woman who had worked on some of the low-budget films with me, Deborah Hill. And she introduced me to this young filmmaker, John Carpenter. And she said that she and John had written a script. They were going to make it. They had found the money, and it was going to be called Halloween. And I said, sure, I'd love to meet him. And we hit it off. We made the movie. And then after that, I made some more movies.
One or two. Yeah. I heard a little bit of the reason you got that too. You had your own gear. Was that seems to be a popular path for a lot of people nowadays? They all buy a camera and they're.
Yeah, the low budget movies that I was working on, we were always struggling to have enough lighting equipment, enough cameras for the action sequences, and so forth. So I had this idea to make a van, an equipment truck. And I got a Dodge van, brand new, put extra doors on the sides and built in a cable reel, and I made it very specific, purpose-built. And then in it were about 30 lights and all of the stuff that we couldn't normally afford. And I priced it so it was affordable, and that was my leverage. Of course you can have the equipment. However, there's a catch. I have to shoot the movie. Well, they bought it. So I was fortunate enough to be able to get, some pretty interesting low-budget movies. And of course, met John Carpenter, with whom I made some other movies. And,
I think I don't know, a quick question. Are a lot of people coming tomorrow night too? There's another event tomorrow. I see a few people nodding. Because we're going to talk, I think, a lot more about some of these other films. Because I think
some of the others also have some demo stuff from Jurassic Park. So, we'll sort of continue the learning about Jurassic Park.
Awesome. All right. So you went along making these indie films and sort of moving up in stature and, obviously success. Halloween, I think, if memory serves, I didn't actually look this up, but I think isn't it considered still one of the most successful independent films ever, I think.
Yeah, it was, for a long time, the most successful independent film, dollar in for dollars out, of a long time. I think it's been passed now, but
maybe Blair Witch or something, probably.
Yeah, because the price of the tickets have gone up. But so it was, and interestingly, Halloween, the first week it came out, it was such a new, unusual thing. It's easy to look back now and say, oh, Halloween, yeah, oh, that was one of those slasher movies. Well, at the time, there were no horror films like that. And it wasn't really slasher because we didn't use any blood. A lot of people sort of, the imagination is much more powerful anyway. And so we made the movie. The first week it came out, a few people went to see it, but not a lot. And so everybody said, well, I guess it was a nice attempt. I'm glad we tried that. The second week, a lot more people came out. The third week, a lot more people. And it was a word of mouth kind of thing. So it really, it proved that you could make a low budget film creatively and touch an audience. And so we were very fortunate that way.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a different time too, which is nice that a film like that would be given a chance, I guess, because nowadays if the film didn't do well in the first week, it would probably be gone.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, is that they expect instant gratification, and so if you don't make a fortune the first weekend and the first week and maybe the second weekend or second week, they pull the film and they just let the superhero movies continue.
I guess we can thank the gentleman behind this movie a little bit for that. I think Jaws was officially the biggest, or the first blockbuster where they realized.
Yeah, exactly.
The opening weekend was important.
Yeah.
And I think they spent think something like $65 million advertising this lead up or something like that.
Yeah,
that was a large amount, I recall.
That could be. It was it was a unique film, and Universal wanted to get behind it, so they put the advertising money into it, and it paid off.
Well, so tell me a little bit then about how this film. I mean, you had worked with Spielberg before. You did Hook before this one, right?
Yeah, I my acquaintanceship with Stephen actually went back a ways. We had made movies on the Universal lot, the Back to the Futures and so forth. So I knew and had met Stephen and Kathy Kennedy and the Amblin folks for a few movies, and then he invited me to work on Hook, and we apparently got along. So he invited me to make Jurassic Park, and I said, sure, why not? Dinosaur movie. Nobody's done one of those in a while.
Did you know what you were in for with the?
No, what was interesting is that Hook had gone over schedule and over budget, and Universal was, a little apprehensive. So they told Stephen he really had to rein it in, and he was determined to show that he was a responsible filmmaker. He was going to do it for the budget and the schedule. And so we approached it that way. And we'd had production meetings. And originally they were going to make these dinosaur sequences stop motion. The old-fashioned rubber puppets with you.
King Kong and that.
Yeah, exactly. So it was going to be stop motion. And we were about, a couple of weeks into pre-production. We would sit at a production meeting table, and we would be going over all the aspects of shooting that scene or whatever. And they were making storyboards, the sketches for each shot, so that everybody would know what it was going to be. And the studio had told Stephen that he could only have 150 special effects shots. Now, 2,000-3,000 is not unusual. 150 of these dinosaur shots. And then at one of the meetings, Dennis Murin, who's credited up there, said, Stephen, we can do these in the computer, we think. And he said, oh, well, that's new and interesting. Let's see what you got. And he said, well, we don't have anything yet, but we think we can do it. But wait right here. So he came back a week later, and he showed us some very crude but intriguing dinosaur things. And Stephen said, well, that's good. That's a skeleton of a dinosaur running, but there's no skin on it. Some look like with skin? Dennis said, wait till you see that. Wait right here. And he came back a week later with some more. And over a period of, 5 or 6 weeks, we kept seeing slightly better, and then drastically better, and then amazingly better computer-generated stuff. So we committed to it. We didn't see any finished shots. We just saw the elements. So we committed to it and started to make the movie, trusting that this newfangled computer stuff was going to work.
So the studio loved that.
Yeah. So, there were some questions, but we said, yeah, we can do it. And so we began making the movie. And I had done Roger Rabbit, so I had this sensibility about shooting stuff that wasn't there, creatures that weren't there. So I was kind of the guide for that kind of stuff. And, it seemed to work out, as we saw.
There you go. I'm curious, at one point, I think I looked up something that said there was a very long prep period, which would make perfect sense. How long were you involved in prep on it?
Oh, can't remember. In those days, the prep was longer. Now it's getting shorter and shorter because everything becomes more, I wouldn't say mechanical, but the expectations are you'll use the techniques that have been used already. So for that one, I think I was on it for about 12 or 14 weeks of prep, shooting tests and investigating this newfangled computer stuff, and scouting the locations. We shot, in spite of the fact that everyone says, "Oh, how long were you in Hawaii and Kauai?" We were there for, I think, about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And the rest of it, all of that night jungle and the rain and everything was on stages at Universal, which was a big help because shooting at night in a jungle in the rain is not fun or sometimes not even possible. So.
Yeah. So some of the tests you did, would they have been doing comps? And I'm curious, because we talked a little bit about this earlier, how you would get in, at this time, a computer-generated image married to a film image?
Well, it was very much a hybrid at that point. Now, you shoot digitally, you create digitally, you composite digitally, and then you output to a digital. Seeing film like this is kind of a rarity. But in those days, we were finding our way. And so we shot on film. They created the dinosaurs digitally. They composited them film on film optically, except for some of the stuff would be outputted by a computer. And then we would cut the negative and, go through the film process, which was, a little more rustic, you might say, than what it is now. And seeing your final results was sometimes a great surprise. The dailies the next morning after you shot the scene yesterday, you'd sit there and say, "Oh, wow, that came out really good." Then you'd also say, "Oh, wow, why is that so dark?" Or that didn't come out like we thought. So, it was a lot more interesting time, but also nerve-wracking.
So again, and then, Planning Utah, you mentioned storyboards. Is that how strictly they worked? I mean, I guess there was no, did you do any animations, or they didn't obviously have previs, I guess, back then, so nothing.
Well, oddly enough, there was previs because I think we sort of invented previs. Previs being the fact that besides the drawn storyboards that are just static, comic books, you might say, Stephen was adamant about 150 shots. And we would sit at one of these production meetings, and Stephen would say, "Okay, so this is the scene when he comes out and does this and so forth. So we need a shot of this with the dinosaur and the thing. How many is that?" And the AD or whoever was keeping track, or the artist, would say, "Let's see, that's 152. And Stephen would say, "Okay, let's get rid of 2 shots. Which ones can we get rid of?" And he was adamant that it would be 150, and I believe it was. But there was also this very crude computer animation that was based on geometric shapes, cylinders and squares and circles, that kind of stuff they'd been modeling for a while. So we created little sequences to see how long they were going to be, and a man would be made up of a cylinder and 2 stubby cylinders for legs and 2 more cylinders for arms and a round ball for a head, but it would move, and it could be animated. And it was a very, very crude way of judging the length of time of a shot and stuff. So we were in fact finding our way through all this, and it became something that was extremely useful, because anybody who was involved in the shot could then see the intention and what the composition would be, and what's, the action and so forth. And the guys who were doing the rubber dinosaurs, Dan Winston and his group, they could, understand that how the movement should be, and then the animators would also look at the shot and understand what their involvement was going to be. So it was a whole group of people finding their way through this new technology. Oh, who's that again?
Very cool. So, I think we'd all love to work for Steven. So I'm curious to know, like, a little bit of how he works, potentially a little bit like.
Well, it's interesting. What I probably should have said to warn everybody is to watch how well he uses the camera to combine bits of action and character moments and so forth into one shot, rather than a close-up of the guy and a close-up of the girl and another close-up of, and then the editor would cut them together, and you as an audience would watch cut. And Stephen, who is such a great visual storyteller, would combine shots so that you would be on the close-up of the person, and then pan over, and there's the other one, and then one more would come up into frame, and you'd get 3 moments in one shot, and then follow over to something else and reveal a moment, and then some characters talking and so forth. So combining that into visually interesting ways and telling the story was one of the ways I think that we ended up coming in under schedule and under budget. There was supposed to be about 30 days of second unit, some other guys going out and shooting stuff. We ended up shooting that stuff and saving about 20-some days of second unit. Plus, we came in, I think, 12 days under schedule because we were efficiently shooting all of these moving shots and people entering frame. So Universal was delighted, first, by the fact that we came under schedule, under budget, and with 150 dinosaur shots. And then they were delighted when they were the first company to make $1 billion. So we had 2 delighteds out of it.
Pretty awesome. Okay, I'm trying to think of, so with these kind of moving shots and that, where he comes and has it all planned out, would that be all then, again, in the storyboards? And did you have all that worked out when he would arrive on set? Or was there some room when you were show up in the day to say, hey, let's try this?
Sometimes the storyboard would reflect the intention. But most of the time, he and I would work out the shot specifically there, because it all depended on where the actors were standing, what's the background, how could they move, where could the camera go, could we move the camera with a dolly shot or whatever. And so a lot of it, you sort of work out on the day and on the set.
So even if you had CGI, then he could decide, based on where you were, okay, the T-Rex should come in there. Mm-hmm. Based on, as opposed to having it all worked out that, okay, we sort of know what has to happen here, so we need to put the actors here, like which one?
Yeah, it's sort of a 2-layered thing. You try to visualize as much as possible in our case, the dinosaur shots, because there were a lot of people involved in making and creating and doing the puppeteering of dinosaurs. The CG work, and the production design, and everybody. So the intention of the shot with a storyboard is good, but most of the time when you get there, you start with the storyboard, but it's up to your creative, instincts to actually make the shots work.
Okay. It's funny because I sort of had always heard that Spielberg was actually quite notoriously fast on set. So I wonder if this was the beginning of it, I guess, was when he started to...
Yeah, a lot of his earlier films, he was very meticulous in storyboarding. Mm-hmm. He would preconceive the film very carefully. And he would draw the little sketches of what each shot should be, what each storyboard should be, and give that to the storyboard guy, who would then turn it into professional-looking drawings. As he's gotten more experienced, if you say that of him, as he's gotten more experienced, now I understand he less and less goes by these preconceived shots, but trusts his instinct in staging on the set, working with the actors, and then creating the moves and the shots as he goes.
Did you, in your discussions with him, does he have, what sort of discussions do you have about the look of a film? Whether you could compare it, always for yourself, I guess, between Hook and this, as far as we're talking about it, what kind of examples you would have, or do you use examples of other films?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a process. I remember sitting down before each film, and we'd go to the screening room in his offices at Universal, and he would have rolls of prints of various films back there, and papered, as they called it. In other words, he would have the editor roll down to a particular scene or shot, put a little piece of paper, tape it to that, and roll it some more and put a piece of tape, and then he would give that to the projectionist, and the guy would load up in the middle of these big giant rolls of film just the specific shots. Now, of course, you go to the computer and you call up the time code and zoop, there it is.
Yeah.
Well, in those days, it was a little more cumbersome.
Yes.
And we would look at stuff, and he would say, okay, here's what I'm thinking out. What do you think of this scene? It's all done in silhouette or whatever. And I say, yeah, oh, that's a great idea. You have to be sure you stage it so the audience understands what the characters are doing, whatever. And then roll to the next, shot, and say, oh, here's all soft light. So what we do is we would examine examples of looks that he liked, and I would make notes and comment on things, and so we would come away with a kind of a concept for the film in general, but each scene also. And he's I enjoy the fact that he kind of feels the same way I do, which is the movie should never look the same. You shouldn't decide you're going to use all soft light from the top and light every scene like that. Sometimes television tends to be like that. But each scene should be distinctive. It should tell the audience something with the lighting, where the camera is, size of the shots, and so forth. And then the next scene should be a refresher. It's all dark. The audience is understanding it's creepy and mysterious. And then the next scene is something a little different. Or it's the same because it's the same time period or whatever. So each scene has its own kind of look and style.
Do you find he has a particular penchant for certain lenses or anything like that? Does he like to stay a little wider and closer, I think?
Yeah, typically, I think Stephen especially enjoys, mixing it up. You'll notice that there's a lot of wide shots that turn into another wide shot that turns into a wide shot as we pan or whatever. But then again, he also likes intimate close-ups. There's a lot of shots of the mouth of the guys yelling and of people talking with cigarettes hanging and so forth. So I think he's always interested in capturing your attention and making sure you're not lulled into sameness. It's always interesting.
There's always, and then of course there's my favorite, of course, this, I consider it the Spielberg shot that everybody uses it, but the nice little push in to accentuate certain points, and I think there's 4 or 5 of them in here.
He's invented several of those things that have become just part of our vocabulary in storytelling. But he very much enjoys, the face of the kid, and then as there's a moment of awe and wonder as the camera moves in to make you feel like you're seeing this accentuated moment. So, he has developed some very specific shots. He likes shots where, sorry, my Ebola acts up every now and then. But he likes shots that are typically wider, and then have it always surprising you with a face in frame, and another face rises up into frame, and another one, then they turn and reveal somebody in the background. So it's always interesting, and those are the shots I think that he especially enjoys. So we do them quite a bit.
Does he? I'm guessing because they all, of course, are related to what's going on in the film. Like there's obviously a particular moment. Obviously, the first one is when they see the dinosaurs for the first time, and there's the push in on Sam Neill, and then he turns her head, and then it pushes in on her, and then it does what you said. She rises up, and it turns into the two shot of them, so very combined. But so it's like all of those things all at once.
Yeah, it's very much a flowing images that lead one to the other, but at the same time, it's not just cut to the face, but it tells you, oh, this is a special moment by moving in slowly.
Very cool. Would you say, a little bit about your approach to these things? Do you have, would you say a lighting approach in general, like with certain things? Like I know, like for him, there's huge sets, dealing with these giant set pieces.
I like it. It's a cliche, painting with light, but that's what we do. You look at a room where there's no light on. If it's completely dark, you can't see anything. So now, you probably
a room full of
that.
cinematographers.
Yeah. So now it's up to you to begin painting the things that are important to that shot, to the story, to the scene, and using, overall soft light or, spots of light and little streaks and things that bring out textures, and so it's very much like painting would be done by an artist. You start with a blank canvas, and now you apply the light or the paint, and you begin to get images that evoke a certain feeling or emotion. So I typically will do that. I enjoy drawing attention to something. A lot of times there'll be just a little bit of light on the eyes, so that you are drawn to the eyes to look at them. So I think it's very much about creating the lighting that draws attention and tells the audience what they should be looking and feeling.
So in Jurassic Park, there's a number of sets that you've used. You got to go in and do pre-lights for those, and would that been done during prep, or do you do them simultaneously? Do you have like a pre-lighting crew? How would that sort of situation work?
When you're working with a big studio like Universal, it takes them quite a while to build those jungles, to build the interior of the compound, a lot of the things. So when they're under construction, you sort of wander and look to see what it's going to look like, and sometimes you have the luxury of saying, well, I just went down to the stage. Would it be possible to put a window over here? We can get some light to come through, and so the prep is very important with a big studio production. Less and less time is available to us because on smaller budget films, little indie films and stuff, most of the time now you are working in real locations, and you have to figure out how to work and achieve the look that you want with these real locations. You have less chance to manipulate beforehand.
Okay. Anybody showing up? That's what I was trying to see out to the. If anybody wants to ask questions, you can work your way there, and if I notice you're there, then we can sort of.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the lights to come in, and while the lights are coming in, I'm going to interject, and I'm going to say to Dean, I know that you have a favorite film that we talked about recently at dinner over some wine, and I know that favorite film of yours is Apollo 13. And no conflict, no interest. We're working on a series called The Expanse, 200 Years in the Future, and we try to simulate what Apollo 13 did, as you explained, realism. And that's what we do. And on The Expanse, it is a show about science fact and not science fiction. So I plant that seed in your mind, and I ask you, Apollo 13, what was that journey like?
So yeah, Apollo 13 was, for me, also a great adventure. I have a whole variety of films that are great adventures. I point to a few of them as my favorite adventures, and Apollo 13 was one of them because Ron Howard and I had decided that we wanted the film to look as authentic as possible. And it was about a very particular thing that the audience had seen before on television, in the news, and so forth. And so there was this perception about how one sees the space program, the moon Apollo missions, and various others. So it was all about creating an authentic look. So I looked at the footage of previous adventures by the astronauts and decided there were certain things that the ways that we had seen. In other words, the interior of the capsule, when it's in space, is always, the capsule is always rotating because it's hot on one side, is way below zero on the other. So in order to keep the thing evenly heated, the capsule is deliberately given a roll, barbecue roll they call it. And as a result, the windows are always aiming at the sun and then not aiming at the sun and then aiming at the sun. So the light coming through the windows and from the sun is always moving. So I was determined that we would always do that rather than it being stationary, give a sense of movement at all times. And we did that with putting a light on the end of a crane arm with a controllable light, one of those rock and roll things you see on the stage all the time. And by moving the light past the window, but always keeping it aimed in through the window, there was this bright sunlight that would cross over the inside, creating all this moving reflection also. And then there were a lot of other little things. I had them build a rig to hold the camera. The camera would be in this kind of bag, mesh bag. And then a long cable went up to the ceiling of the stage, which was about as high as this theater, and then over to the side and down to a weight. What that did is it counterbalanced the camera, and it gave it the ability to move it very smoothly and as if it was weightless, to give a smooth sense of movement to it, but still not be completely locked off. And we could also move it so it looked as if the capsule were rolling or whatever. So there were a lot of those little, thought processes that we used beforehand to create a realistic look at the mission and how it was done and how the audience had seen the real ones, so it would give a sense of reality.
Just a few of the intel moments in your life. So if there's anybody that wants to come up and ask questions, please come up to the microphone. And we'll just spin the camera around for the questions.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Dean. We met a few times. I was at the ASC Clubhouse in Hollywood recently shooting those little videos with you
yes.
guys. How you doing?
Very well.
Thank you for coming. Thanks. Quick thank you to CSC, Jim, everybody. Really awesome. Jim was actually acting in my student film about 20 years ago. If you knew that, Manny, he actually was an actor. So the technical question is, I'm so excited because I love these movies. I'm gonna shoot these movies one day. Color. You guys have talked a lot about questions I already had in my head, and we'll talk tomorrow. But if we could touch on color, you shot this on film. You're shooting digitally today. How do you feel about color then versus how you do color now versus how you painted with light then for stock versus how you paint with light digitally today? Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. I could actually probably bore you for 2 hours, but I won't. Film, we didn't know any better beforehand because film was what we shot with. And as I explained to students and when I do classes, in those days, the light was out there, it would come through the lens and it would get stuck on the film. And however it was there, that's the way it was, which meant anything you wanted to do about the look, you had to do out there on the stage or in the location. Where the light came from, the contrast, the color of the individual lights, all of that was a carefully thought out process, because when you looked at the film after that, there was very little you could do to manipulate that. Now we have almost unlimited control in the digital world. We shoot digitally, but we finish digitally. And the things that were impossible on film are now just common stuff. Not only making it brighter and darker, you can increase the contrast, you can increase the color saturation, decrease it so it's desaturated. You can turn it into sepia, into black and white, and all kinds of controls, visual control that we didn't have in those days. So that's something we take advantage of, something that you test to decide if you want a particular kind of look for a particular film or scene. And so I really enjoy the creative control that we have with the digital world compared to film. But I'm a strong advocate for still using that, creating the majority of what you want to have on the film or the digital in front of the lens. Paint with the light, the contrast, try to make it as much like a film image as possible so that you're not taking a lot of time or trying to fix things later. Be careful with your exposures and your contrast and the light direction and color and everything so that you have the maximum amount of creative control afterwards.
Do you recall what stock you used for this?
Oh, no, they changed the numbers on the film stock so often. That,
Yeah, but not so necessarily the number, but was it like 100 ISO, or would you have used 200 or 500?
Well, I think it was like 125 and 400 or something like that. We had two stocks, a faster one and a slower one.
Yeah.
So, but it was always interesting because Kodak was always improving the stock, so you had to stay up with it and test it and try out different things.
But if you were doing, actually, I lied. For a second there, I was going to say most of the CGI shots were in the daytime, but of course there weren't. There's the big night scene and some of the interiors. But often with CGI, do they want to use the 100 ISO? Because of course the way they had to do it then with all the optical printing, then you have multiple generations. I know I've run across that before back in my early assisting days. Where you had to, you wanted to shoot that knowing that you were going to have 3 generations to do an optical, so you want the finest grain as possible.
Yeah, the rule of thumb was always use the slowest film and the finest grain that you could for any particular situation, depending on how big the lighting had to be and so forth. But it was really all about the fact that we didn't know any better. So we just would shoot with fine-grained film. We would shoot with, the right amount of light so that we knew that when it was duplicated later, it wouldn't get too contrasty, or they didn't have to print it up and it would get grainy or whatever. So it was very much a thought process, and which is one I encourage now. Do the same kind of thinking, because it'll give you the same capability of improving or compositing.
100%. Cool. What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, so speaking then in that line, I had apparently Spielberg, as soon as you moved off to Poland to do Schindler's List, and was going back and forth. Were you involved much in the post production on this, or was strictly in the color time?
I was watching. Stephen went off to Poland, and ILM was a little worried. They were doing the animation and everything, and Universal was a little worried. So they set up this absolutely astounding thing that nobody had ever done. They would take the images that were being generated in San Francisco. They would run it through a very fast wire. They would beam it up to this thing called a satellite. You've heard it. Okay, so that's good. I don't have to explain that. Beam it up to this satellite, and then that would beam it down to Europe, and it would go to a computer, and he would be able to see the same thing you can see on your phone in your pocket right now, So it was a whole new technological, age, and the stuff we were doing was just part of what was developed for all kinds of purposes, and we were coattailing on a lot of this newfangled computer stuff that has now led to the fact that you can do the same thing that ILM was doing on your iPad or your laptop.
Yeah, you can get apps to do some of these things nowadays that just do it in real time, some of these effects. Did you have any discussions with other DPs? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, somebody will tell me, who shot like Terminator 2, which was, of course, the other big CGI film that was a couple of years before this, and was sort of one of the first times people were doing any kind of real photorealistic CGI. So who shot Terminator? Sorry? Alan Greenberg. But I'm just curious if you had any discussions or anything with other.
No, we were sort of trailblazing on our own. ILM was creating this new animation process and technology. So we sort of just developed it on our own. We shot tests and I went up to ILM and I saw the computers that they were using, and they were SGI or something like that. And the processing units of the computer were the size of about that far, thing. They're large refrigerators.
Yes.
And they had to be kept in this room with constant air conditioning because they would generate so much heat. Yes. And they had 3 of these refrigerator computers, which now your desktop has equal or better computing power. So it was a process of just sort of developing it on our own as we went, and ILM doing the same.
Very cool.
Yeah, so we have a few questions here before we pull out our sleeping bags, and I know we can spend the night here.
So I go over here, and I'll come over to you.
And I can put them to sleep.
No, it's not about sleep. It's about spending the night because you have so much knowledge there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
We should take this gentleman here first.
Yes.
In the color noir world of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in the scene inside the bar with Jessica Rabbit, what was the work of lighting that to incorporate the cartoon characters and with the real people at the time?
Roger Rabbit, excuse me, Roger Rabbit was, I always point to that as being one of my 3 favorite films. It was again, a journey into the semi-unknown. Now they've been doing compositing animation and live action for a while, since the silent days, where Disney's first film was Alice in Cartoonland. So the concept was not new, but we wanted to take it a step further. So we were told, we couldn't move the camera. We had to lock it off, right, to give the animators room to move the cartoon characters in the frame. And I would say, well, suppose we want to pan with no, don't pan. All right, so now when they walk through shadow and darkness, how about it? No, don't. They can't go through shadow and darkness. You have to light the scene very evenly, which is a euphemism for flat. And I said, well, now when they interact with the world, no, don't have them pick up anything or do any of that stuff. So as Bob and I left that meeting, we looked at each other and said, those are the rules we're going to break. And we did that, and we would look for all kinds of opportunities to create this feeling of interaction with the real world, moving in and out of light and shadow, picking up objects and moving chairs, and the camera following a character because he would not logically be walking along over to Eddie or something. So using those rules that we decided to break, we always thought of every shot as how would we do this if the characters were real? What would they really do? They wouldn't be in a big wide shot with flat lighting. They would be moving, we'd follow them, we'd dolly, we'd do whatever. And as a result, the work on Roger Rabbit was very much sort of groundbreaking. Now, once again, it's the kind of thing you can do on your laptop. But shortly after Roger Rabbit came out, every cereal commercial had animated characters interacting and so forth. So it was fun to do that, fun to invent these new rules, and then it's fun to see the legacy of what where it's gone and how it's affected our current filmmaking.
Very cool. Thank you. It was an amazing film. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And jump forward to this one.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
So I'm a huge fan of like monster movies, creature features, all that. And Jurassic Park isn't necessarily a monster movie, more of a creature feature, I guess. But I was wondering what your approach was to framing the bad guys versus the good guys, like Brontosaurus versus Velociraptor, if there was a difference to you in wanting to frame them as different characters.
No, I would say we treated them as if they were, actual creatures, because that's what you have to do. You have to, tell the audience that they're seeing something like what they've seen all of their movie-going, viewing lives. They're used to seeing, a shot of a certain size and movement and so forth. So we approached it that way, again, as if these creatures were really there. And how would we shoot them? How high would the camera be? How low would it be for each shot, the intention of each? So I would say that there wasn't any a specific thing other than typically shooting them low because to make them more dominant, obviously more potentially threatening to the humans.
Thank you.
There's a young man over there who has a question.
Hey, Dean. I have a very important question. I've watched this film over and over again, probably 6 or 8 times over the years. And as we rolled the credits this evening, I noticed there was one credit, and it was for someone named Mate. And I also noticed that there was the actor who played Mate was Dean Cundey. And my question is, I've watched the movie. I've never seen you in the movie, but are you actually there? And where are you?
That's a good question. Let me start back. When I was doing research for the character, I interviewed about 8 Navy guys who had been in storms. No, actually, there's a little moment where on Nedry's screen, there's a guy who's saying, "Nope, we've got to get going," and then a giant wave dramatically hits him, almost killing him. And then I recovered, and I thought, no, this poor guy, and I won't go into all of that, but it was an interesting thing that it was, when we looked at the dailies, it was a big full-frame screen of me and all of this water and being dramatic and stuff. And then when it gets in the movie, I get composited down to about 1.5 inches and made blurry so it looks like it's video. And so it's like it could have been anybody. And
Yeah, I noticed you didn't get your close-up.
no, there was no close-up. However, I did get, I was in the Screen Actors Guild, so I do get residuals from that. Oddly enough, which is interesting because every now and then I'll get a check from Universal for Jurassic Park. It'll be $2.08 or something like that.
Nice.
But, I'm sure there are guys who get a lot bigger residual checks.
Colin over there has a question.
Hi, Dean.
Hi.
So you're pretty much the reason I'm a cinematographer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wouldn't you really rather be an anesthesiologist?
I have thought about it.
No pressure at all.
Mom maybe thinks that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. No, I mean, of course, body work is fantastic. But when I first started seeing the things you were doing was with John Carpenter way back when. And a lot of your work was anamorphic. And a lot of Steven's work is anamorphic. And so I'm kind of curious if there was a technical reason why Jurassic Park decided to be spherical, as I believe it was.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've always liked anamorphic, a big wide aspect ratio. And John agreed, so almost everything I did with him was anamorphic. Anytime it was possible, I would, shoot anamorphic or suggest it to the director who, it was interesting. There are some directors who would say, oh, well, the screen is so wide. How do you frame a close-up, right? Because then there's a whole bunch of wasted space. And you say, no, that's not wasted space. That's storytelling space. That's lurking space for the killer, or that's the scenery or whatever. So I loved anamorphic. Hook was anamorphic because there are a lot of people and scenery and so forth. When we talked about this one, Steven said, these dinosaurs are taller than they are wide. So I think it should be 185, which it was. I didn't necessarily agree because there's an awful lot of environment you can put in there, but he was afraid it would make them look smaller because there was all of this extra space. So I said, well, okay, there's some logic to that. So we specifically decided to go 185 spherical so that the dinosaurs had a bigger presence in each frame.
follow-up question.
I understand Steve's very fast. Steve, we're very on a first-name basis. Steven is very fast. He works very quickly. Did that change your lighting approach? Did you have to sort of modulate how you set up a given set or anything to deal with how he moved the camera and
No,
the
I
speed
think
you wanted to work at?
that's one of the fun challenges of being a cinematographer is understanding how the director works. What is their thought process, their style going to be, and how can you accommodate that? How can you anticipate that? And I worked with Stephen on Hook, and it became fairly evident early on that he was going to be fast. He would think things out, but he was always open for an improvement or an embellishment on his shot, and that became one of the great fun things. There are times, for instance, on Hook, a lot of times he would say, "Okay, that's a wrap for today. Now tomorrow, what I want to do is a shot on the deck of the pirate ship, and the guys are there, and then Robin and so forth, and that'll be the shot. So you guys can get started in the morning." It was a wise thing. We would get started, but knowing how he liked to compose and the shots and so forth, I said, you know what? He's going to miss the fact that this guy's over here, or this, he's going to want to compose for this or whatever. So a lot of times we would light and set up for his specific shot, and then I'd say, okay, clear that stuff away. Let's put some lights back there. Make sure we have the guys for, that fill in that space. And Stephen would come in the morning, he'd say, okay, let's do the shot, and he'd do it, and he'd do it a couple times, and then he'd say, we really should be seeing that over there. How long is it going to take? And you'd say, well, we're actually ready for that because, it's all set. And he, really? Oh, my God. And he was so impressed. I think that happened twice, but... so, no, so you get to anticipate the style and so forth. So you begin working kind of in advance and putting in some lights for yourself to embellish the shot, rather than just being the shot that the director wants or thinks he wants. You can prepare for improvements as you realize certain things about it.
Wow. Oh, we have, I think, the last question coming up.
All right.
Hi. So over the past 26 years, we've learned a lot more about dinosaurs, specifically regarding how they looked. And I was wondering, had that knowledge been available when you guys were starting the film, would the knowledge of fuzzy, feathery dinosaurs had affected how you would have approached the film visually?
Well, I think that we always had kind of this vision of what dinosaurs were, and all of the research that they did, they made some amazing drawings that took into consideration 2 or 3 theories of what the T-Rex would look like and so forth. But I think it was based on the fact that we had in our minds seen dinosaurs like that. We'd seen these big skeletons in the natural history museums and so forth. So everything that the guys did to design these creatures was based on known facts. I think if we'd had evidence of feathered dinosaurs and there were those kinds of drawings and renderings and concepts, we'd have followed along and find ways to make fluffy, feathery dinosaurs also look mean and nasty.
Just like our pillows at night. On that note, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Arthur. Thank you for doing your homework and being so diligent on that. Thank you. I would like to just say thank you to a few, again, the sponsors above us. Thank you. We wouldn't be here without you.
I thank them also
Yes, thank you.
for this opportunity.
And thank you. Apparently, earlier I said Tim Teven was here, but that was his twin brother. It's Jim, actually, that I thank for being the conduit to this happening. Thank you. Oliver and Bonaccini and Tiff, thank you very much for allowing us to do what we do. And you do what you do. Patty Guignard from CSC, George Willis, I'd like to thank Jeremy Benning, Susan Sarenchuk, and a key factor of who we wouldn't be here because you guys were communicating with her was Michelle today. So thank you all for doing what you do. In this journey, we found out that what we would like to do on behalf of the sponsors is approach us earlier, tell us that you want to do 2-3 events a year, and we can put our marketing money towards adventures like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to form a committee of like-minded souls and folks and project forward 2 or 3 events that go from January to potentially April 2020, and we'll approach all the sponsors above in November, December, and say, here's a hat, please put it in, and this is what we would like to do. So we look forward to doing that as well and continuing these sort of events on behalf of the CSC. So that's a plan for the future.
You know, I have to say, one thing that the ASC and the CSC and so much of what we do depends on the sponsors that I am tremendously thankful to, their spirit of helping out, because in theory they don't get anything from it other than, helping people understand and make choices, important ones, to be or not be an anesthesiologist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I was going to be a proctologist in my early incarnation of life, but I pass on to everyone up above is I give them an attaboy. So, and I'm very, very diligent about knocking on their doors, and I don't stop until we get what we need.
Well, that's excellent, and I appreciate what they do.
They do, and we're thankful. And last but not least, in the words of a person that accepted an award at the CSC Awards, thank you to our husbands, our wives, and our partners, and our families. And I thank you for being here tonight. Thank you very much.